guys, it's Ty with Ty the Dog Guy on the daily. I'm out walking my dog Chocolate Chip, and I've got a couple of my client dogs here, some golden retrievers. Now, Chocolate Chip is, and I'm waiting for the gasps of horror. Chocolate Chip is in heat, so I'm actually being very careful, and luckily I've got a good recall, and we're out walking where there aren't any other dogs, and if we happen to see some dogs, of course, I'll call her back. But she's in heat, and for this, I take some criticism from some folks. Because there's a lot of folks out there that say, oh, you must get your dog spayed and neutered. You know, the earlier the better. Or if not early, at least get it done, you know, when they're 6 months or a year or something like that. And today's podcast and video, I didn't want to necessarily come out and definitively say, here is what I think versus here's what I think is wrong. And the reason why is I'm not an expert on, you know, dog hormones and surgeries and spaying and neutering. But what I did want to do in today's podcast is I did want to at least offer a different perspective for folks to think about. Because often there are a lot of vets, and don't get me wrong, I love vets, but there are a lot of veterinarians who are giving different types of information out without really looking at, you know, some of the available information out there. There is a number of studies that have come out in the past decade or so that show some evidence that neutering and spaying your dog early is actually not a good thing. That it can lead to higher instances of cancer, that it can lead to different behavioral issues and things like that. And on the surface, to me, it makes sense, right? And when most folks start to dig into it, it kind of makes sense, because if you think about it, you know, the dog, like a female, when you're removing all the organs and stuff that goes with spaying, you're taking out a big chunk of their endocrine system. With the male, you know, when you remove testicles and when you remove the, you know, the hormones that go with that, you know, those are pretty important hormones that go along with growth. And so, I mean, consider what would happen with, you know, doing a hysterectomy for, you know, let's say a 5-year-old girl. Or, you know, I don't know why you'd ever do this, but, you know, well, of course you wouldn't do this, but, you know, removing the testicles of a young boy. Those things have been done, I mean, for medical reasons. You know, young girls have had hysterectomies and things like that. And it creates hormonal imbalances, and it creates health problems that then need to be corrected other ways, right? Same thing with boys. You know, unfortunately, there's parts of the world where young boys, you know, sometimes are kidnapped and they are, you know, sterilized. And you see, you know, the different health issues and mental health issues that come from when that happens. Chip, come here. And so anyways, when we look at it in terms of, you know, comparing it to humans, you know, some folks immediately say, oh gosh, you're right. You know, taking away those hormones, taking away, you know, that part of the endocrine system when they're young, gosh, that might not be such a good idea. And again, this isn't to pass judgment, because, you know, most people have had spayed or neutered pets at one point, and this isn't, or currently do, and this isn't a, you know, point fingers. But like I say, there's been some studies that show that that doing this, come on guys, that doing this can lead to different health problems. And then of course there's studies that show that not neutering and not spaying can lead to health problems too. And so that's why I say I'm not qualified to definitively say one way or the other. But I remember, you know, I tell this story sometimes that you know, it was, I don't know, maybe a year or two back, I was doing a lot of research on the topic, and I came across these studies. I came across a few studies, and we're talking reputable, peer-reviewed, published studies done by universities, not some silly internet article. But these are, you know, studies done at universities on potential dangers of early spay and neuter. And I remember at the time going to the vet for, you know, one of the dogs I was training that was going to be a service dog, and he was intact. He wasn't neutered. And the vet, you know, said something to me of the effect of, all right, well, when are we getting this dog neutered? And I said, well, I'm not going to neuter him. If the owner eventually decides to, that's up to them. but I'm not going to neuter him. And she looked at me, you know, she stopped and she was shocked. She looked at me and she said, why would you not neuter your dog? And I said, oh, you know, there's just some studies that show that there could be some potential downfall to doing it. I wasn't in the mood to like get into an argument or anything like that. And so I just said, yeah, there's some studies that show that it might not be great. Now, as I'm saying this to you guys, I also recognize what this looks like to a vet or a medical professional. You know, medical professionals go to school for years, they're experts in their field, and I know that a lot of them spend big parts of their day with their customers coming into them and saying, well, I read on the internet this and I read on the internet that. And I know that that's a frustrating piece of being a medical professional, whether it's for dogs or humans or whatever. And so I definitely wasn't like that. I was just saying, you know, she asked a question, I gave an answer that, oh, you know, there's these studies and I'm kind of looking into that. And she came back with, no, there's not. And I said, no, there's not what? She said, those studies, they don't exist. And I said, they don't exist? And she says, yes, there are 0 studies that show anything to do with negative side effects of spaying and neutering. And I was just like, wow, you know, this is, you know, there is a great deal of arrogance here, isn't there? You know, somebody, and again, you know, and at that point I just kind of smiled and said, okay. You know, I didn't say anything else. I wasn't looking for any sort of argument. This wasn't my regular vet. This was just a vet down, you know, in a different town, just stopping through because we had a little bit of an ear infection that needed to be cleared up. So anyways, I wasn't looking for any confrontation. I wasn't looking for anything. And simply, this vet was so challenged by the notion that there might be, you know, there might be studies out there that go in contrast to what she learned in veterinary school, that she absolutely just opposed it out of hand. And so these days, again, I don't ever recommend, hey, do this or don't do this definitively. I tell people that I don't spay or neuter mine. I do have a female, she's 13 years old. She is spayed. We waited till she was 2 to do that. And looking back, maybe I would do that again, maybe not. I personally believe, based on the research that I've seen, that waiting longer is a good idea. But what I recommend to folks now is to at least think on it with an open mind. And there's a veterinarian named Dr. Karen Becker that I recommend folks look at, Karen Becker. And she does an amazing job at explaining why she no longer does early spay and neuter from a medical standpoint, not just from, you know, anecdotal, but research and medical base and things like that. So anyways, that's the point of today's podcast. My chocolate chip here, she's not old enough, she's just a little bit over 1, but the plan is to one day breed her. She's a great specimen from a rare breed that she would further the breed, and so she will likely be bred one day. But even if we weren't planning on breeding her, we probably wouldn't be spaying her just for the health benefits of keeping her intact. My Rottweiler, who just passed a few months ago, I'm convinced, and there's of course no way to prove this or prove against it, but I'm convinced that the reason he lived to be a healthy 11 and a half years old, where most Rottweilers I see at 8 years old or on their way out, is because of good diet and leaving him intact. I'm convinced of that. But in any case, do your research, but understand that there are 2 sides to this. Not every vet believes that you need to be spaying or neutering early on. Not every breeder believes that. Not every rescue believes that. So bear that in mind as you are raising your dog.